Hi guys, let's start with a simple thought experiment. Tomorrow morning, when your alarm goes off, imagine not being able to hit snooze. Imagine not even having the choice. Forget about scrolling through your phone, sipping coffee, or sliding into a warm shower. Instead, you're yanked out of sleep by the pale light of dawn sneaking through cracks in the walls of a mud and straw hut. Your alarm clock isn't a buzzing device by your bedside, but the sound of animals stirring, roosters crowing, and the low grumble of your own empty stomach reminding you that work can't wait. This is the wake-up call of a medieval farmer. It's not gentle. It's not optional. It's a demand. From the moment the first rays of light stretch across the horizon, your body is no longer yours. The day belongs to the land, the animals, and the unbreakable rhythm of survival. For us, the hardest part of morning might be shaking off sleep or deciding what to wear. For a medieval farmer, the hardest part is knowing that the moment your eyes open, every ounce of energy will be consumed until the sun drops back below the fields. And even then, rest isn't guaranteed. Picture yourself lying on a bed that is nothing like what you know. No mattress, no memory foam, no blanket tucked neatly around you. Instead, it's a heap of straw spread thin over hard-packed dirt, maybe with a rough woolen cloth thrown on top. The floor beneath you is damp, uneven, and smells faintly of animals, smoke, and mildew. The air is thick, heavy from yesterday's fire that never fully burned out, and it scratches at your throat with every breath. It's not the kind of air that makes you want to take a deep, refreshing inhale. It's the kind that makes you cough and rub your eyes as you sit up. And you don't wake alone. Privacy is a concept you've never heard of. In this hut, your whole family sleeps within arm's reach of each other. Children piled together for warmth. Maybe an elderly parent curled up against the wall. And not just people, animals too. A pig might be snoring softly in the corner. Chickens shuffle restlessly in the pen across the room. Their presence isn't strange to you. They're part of the household, as necessary as food on the table, because their warmth helps keep the chill away at night. This is the world you've always known. When you finally sit upright, the morning light is dim, filtered through a tiny hole or a crude wooden shutter. It doesn't flood the room, it barely seeps in, enough to reveal the outlines of smoke-stained rafters above you. The hut is quiet for just a moment, then the noise begins. A baby cries, a rooster crows. The animals stir, demanding food, and from outside you hear the voices of neighbors already calling to each other as they step out into the grey light of morning. The day has started, whether you're ready or not. There's no morning routine here, no carefully planned sequence of toothpaste, breakfast, and coffee. Your routine is survival. The first thing on your mind isn't, what should I wear? But will I have enough strength to work today? Food is scarce, and what you eat doesn't fill you with joy. It just fills your stomach enough to push you out the door. Maybe it's a crust of dark bread left over from yesterday, maybe some thin porridge. There's no bacon and eggs sizzling in a pan, no fresh fruit waiting in a bowl. It's plain bland and barely enough to keep you moving. But before you can even think of eating, there are chores. Always chores. The fire in the hearth has gone out overnight, and it must be coaxed back to life. Without fire, there's no warmth, no cooking, no protection. So you hunch down, blowing gently on a faint ember, if you're lucky enough to have one left. If not, you strike flint against steel, sparks dancing until, hopefully, dry kindling catches. The smoke stings your eyes. Your fingers are rough, already calloused from countless mornings like this. It takes patience, but it's a skill you learned young, because fire is as vital as breath itself. Meanwhile, animals demand attention. Someone has to gather eggs, milk the cow if you're lucky enough to have one, feed the pigs, scatter grain for the chickens. These aren't tasks you can put off. A hungry animal means less food for your family later. Everything in this world is tied together, and neglecting one chore could ripple into disaster. You might dream of a moment to stretch, to yawn, to sit and let your mind wander. But dreaming itself is a luxury you don't have time for. And let's be honest, it's exhausting before the real work even begins. You haven't even stepped into the fields yet, and already your body is sore. Kneeling by the hearth, bending to feed the animals, hauling water from the nearest well or stream. It's a never-ending warm-up routine that leads only to harder labor. By now, your modern self would already be craving a coffee break, scrolling for inspiration, or sneaking a few minutes to sit in silence. But in the Middle Ages, those breaks don't exist. Every wasted second is a risk to survival. There's no concept of weekends, no idea of a day off. Even at sunrise, you know that every hour until dusk will be spoken for. The sun itself is your timekeeper, and it is merciless. Too much daylight wasted in the hut means less food on the table when the next season comes. You don't have the comfort of artificial light to extend your working hours. When darkness falls, it falls completely, swallowing the world until dawn returns. That makes every single morning a race against time, a chance you can't afford to squander. Now think of how we wake up today. Some of us can lie in bed for 10 minutes, 15, maybe more, scrolling through feeds, easing ourselves into consciousness. We can tell ourselves, just 5 more minutes. But in a medieval hut, 5 minutes could mean your animals get restless, your neighbors finish their tasks before you, or the morning's precious light slips away. Hesitation is dangerous, comfort is a luxury. The moment you open your eyes, you are already late. It's not just about work, it's about survival. You know that if you fail to tend the fire, your family goes cold. If you fail to care for the animals, you lose food and warmth. If you fail to get to the fields on time, weeds take over or birds swoop in to steal precious seed. Every little slip carries weight, and all of it begins in this moment, this wake-up call, that never really feels like waking. It feels like surrendering to the day's demands. Now, picture yourself trying to handle this. One morning, just one. No coffee, no shower, no breakfast that gives you energy. Instead, smoke in your lungs, mud under your feet, and chores that already leave you tired before sunrise. The thought of climbing back into bed doesn't even exist, because the bed isn't comfortable to begin with. And even if it were, your family and animals wouldn't let you rest. Sleep is for the night, and nights are short. This is the start of every day for a medieval farmer. Not a choice, not a preference, but a relentless rhythm. The wake-up call isn't a sound you can silence. It's the weight of life itself demanding that you rise. And as hard as it is for us to even imagine, for them, this was normal. This was life. And yet, we've only just scratched the surface. Waking up is the easiest part. What comes after stepping out of that cramped, smoky hut is a reality even harder to grasp. Let's walk into that space together and see what it was really like inside the peasant's hut that shaped every breath of their day. You've dragged yourself out of the scratchy pile of straw that passes for a bed, rubbed the smoke from your eyes, and blinked into the dim light of morning. Now, before we step outside into the fields, let's pause for a moment and look around you, because this place you call home, this hut, is more than just 4 walls and a roof. It's a world in itself, and for a medieval farmer, it is at once a shelter, a prison, and a reflection of the life you're trapped inside. At first glance, you might not even call it a house. To modern eyes, it looks closer to something thrown together for animals than for people. The walls are not brick or wood-panelled. They're made of wattle and daub, a lattice of woven sticks plastered with a sticky mix of mud, clay, straw, and sometimes even dung. That might sound unpleasant, and it is, but it's also surprisingly sturdy. When you press your hand against the wall, it feels cool, uneven, slightly damp. The surface crumbles easily, leaving dust on your fingertips. This is what separates you from the wind, the rain, and the cold. It works well enough, but only just. The roof above your head is thatched, layered with bundles of reeds or straw tied tightly together. To you, it looks rustic and picturesque, maybe the kind of thing you'd see in a painting of an old English countryside village. But to live under it is another matter. That roof leaks when the rains come heavy. Insects nest in it. Birds pull away tufts of straw for their own nests. And when the summer sun beats down, the heat gets trapped, making the hut feel more like an oven than a home. Still, it's the only roof you've ever known, and without it, you'd be at the mercy of the elements. Now, take in the size of the place. It isn't a house with multiple rooms or even a single separate bedroom. It's one room, and everything happens here: cooking, eating, sleeping, working, birthing, dying. The entire family squeezes into this space, which might be no larger than a modern living room. The floor beneath you is packed earth, uneven, swept only occasionally with a bundle of twigs. Sometimes, straw is scattered across it to soak up dampness and filth, but it quickly turns into a sour-smelling mat of dirt and waste. You live with it because there's no alternative. What about windows? Forget wide panes of glass letting in sunlight. At best, there's a tiny opening covered by wooden shutters or a thin animal bladder stretched across a frame to let in a hazy glow. Most of the time, though, the hut is dim, lit only by the flicker of the central hearth fire. The smoke from that fire has nowhere to go because chimneys haven't yet become common in peasant homes. Instead, it drifts upward, curling along the rafters, filling your nose and lungs with its sharp, bitter bite. Over the years, the smoke blackens the ceiling beams and coats everything in a layer of soot. It irritates your eyes constantly, stings your throat, and leaves a cough that never really goes away. And the smell, you can't ignore it. This room is thick with scents that cling to every surface. Smoke, sweat, wet straw, the sharp tang of manure, the soreness of unwashed bodies, the earthy dampness of clay walls. It's not one smell, but a chorus of them, layered together until you stop noticing, simply because you've never known anything else. A visitor from the modern world would gag at the door. To you, it is home. But here's the detail that shocks most people. You aren't the only species living here. This one-room hut is shared with animals. Chickens scratch in a corner, pigs root in the straw. Maybe a goat or sheep bleats softly from a small pen partitioned with rough wood. These aren't pets in the way we think of them. They are your wealth, your food supply, your insurance against hunger in the winter. And they live close, not outside in a separate barn, because you need their body heat to help keep the hut warm in the cold months. At night, you fall asleep to the sound of hooves shifting, feathers fluttering, or the occasional grunt of a pig turning over. It's cramped, chaotic, and noisy, but it's also practical. The animals are your survival. They provide eggs, milk, wool, manure for the fields. Their presence is a constant reminder that your life isn't yours alone. It's bound up in this fragile ecosystem of humans and beasts under one roof. When one of them falls sick, the whole family feels it. When one of them thrives, you breathe a little easier. And don't forget the hearth, the heart of the hut. In the center of the room, or sometimes off to one side, a fire burns day and night. It cooks your meals, warms your body, and lights the darkness. But it also fills the air with smoke that hangs low, curling in your hair, stinging your eyes. You might huddle near it on cold mornings, stretching your hands toward the flickering flames. But the fire is as dangerous as it is comforting. A stray spark could catch the thatch above you, and in minutes, everything you own would be gone. Fire is both friend and threat, and you treat it with respect because losing it means freezing or starving. The furnishings, if you can call them that, are few. A rough wooden stool or bench, a table that's little more than planks laid across trestles, perhaps a chest for storing clothes or tools, though clothes usually means one or two coarse woolen garments, worn until they literally fall apart. Beds are piles of straw or, if you're lucky, a wooden frame with ropes crisscrossed and stuffed with hay. Blankets are rough, itchy, often made of wool, sometimes patched and threadbare. Comfort is not a priority, durability is. Everything inside the hut exists to serve a purpose. Nothing is decorative. And yet, despite the poverty of it, this hut is your world. It shelters you from rain and snow. It holds the people you love most closely together. even if that closeness sometimes feels suffocating. The walls may be thin, the roof may leak, the floor may stink, but without it, you have nothing. This is the boundary between survival and exposure, between life and death. Now, think of the psychological weight of living in such a place. In our modern lives, we can step into another room, close a door, and find solitude. Here, solitude is impossible. Every cough, every sigh, every whispered word is shared. Privacy is non-existent. If someone is sick, everyone hears their groans. If a child cries in the night, the whole hut wakes. If you and your spouse argue, your parents, children, and animals are all unwilling witnesses. Home is not a retreat. It is a crucible where every moment of life is on display. And yet, in this small, smoky room, life unfolds in all its forms. Children are born here, mothers laboring by the fire, while neighbors crowd in to help. The sick are nursed here, lying on straw beds as family members dab their foreheads. The elderly die here, their last breaths exhaled into the smoky air. And when a body must be prepared for burial, it is laid out here, in the same space where meals are cooked and children play. Life and death are never separated. They happen side by side, within arm's reach of each other. For a medieval farmer, the hut is not just a backdrop. It shapes who you are. Its closeness teaches you to endure discomfort. Its darkness teaches you to rely on firelight and instinct. Its lack of privacy ties you inseparably to family and community, for better or worse. And every morning, when you rise from that bed of straw and sweep the ashes back to life in the hearth, you are reminded that this hut is both fragile and unshakable. Fragile, because one storm, one fire, one collapsed roof could destroy it in an instant. Unshakable, because it is all you have, and you must make it last. So, when we ask whether you, a modern person, could last a single day as a medieval farmer, don't just think of the fields and the labor. Think of this hut. Think of waking up in the smoke, sharing your home with pigs and chickens, stepping barefoot onto a floor damp with straw. Think of how every cough, every smell, every sound would surround you with no escape. That alone would break most of us before the first hour of the day had passed. And yet, for millions of people across centuries, this was home. This was normal. They endured it not for a day, not for a week, but for their entire lives. The hut wasn't a curiosity or a punishment. It was the fabric of existence. And once you truly grasp what it meant to live inside one, you begin to understand why their resilience was almost superhuman compared to ours. But we're still only scratching the surface, because stepping out of this hut, out into the world beyond its mud walls, you'll find another challenge waiting: food. What you eat, how you eat, and whether you eat at all. That's the next piece of the puzzle. So, let's move forward into the daily diet of a medieval farmer and see how even their meals were battles for survival. You've stepped out of the hut, leaving behind the smoke, the straw, and the restless animals. But before you can think about the fields, before you can even lift a tool, there's one thing pressing at you from the inside out: hunger. Because the truth is, in the life of a medieval farmer, food isn't pleasure, it isn't variety, it isn't choice. It's survival, stripped down to the bare minimum needed to keep your body moving another day. And that makes every meal more than just food. It's a negotiation between your labor and your life. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is not the cheery, indulgent spread we imagine in modern kitchens. No bacon sizzling in the pan, no eggs flipped with butter, no glass of orange juice shining golden in the morning light. Instead, it's a pot of porridge bubbling dully over the fire, made of whatever grain is cheapest and most available. Oats, barley, or rye ground roughly and boiled in water until it's thick enough to fill your stomach, but bland enough that every bite tastes the same. If you're lucky, a bit of salt or a splash of milk adds the faintest hint of flavor. If you're not, it's just gruel spooned out because there's nothing else. Dark bread often appears alongside it, heavy, coarse, and dense, baked with flour so unrefined that small fragments of husk and grit still cling to it. Bite into it, and it crumbles thickly on your tongue. leaving your teeth working hard just to chew. Sometimes it's sour from age, sometimes dry enough that you have to dip it into the porridge to soften it. But you eat it anyway, because hunger doesn't care about texture. Hunger only wants to be filled, and this bread, plain as it is, keeps your legs moving through another back-breaking day. And meat, forget about it. Meat is not breakfast, not lunch, not even dinner most days. It's a prize, a rarity reserved for festivals, holy days, or the rare occasion when one of your animals must be slaughtered. To kill a pig or a cow casually would be madness. It's like destroying your own bank account, your insurance, your food for the winter. So instead, you live mostly on grains and legumes. Porridge in the morning, stew at night, bread all day. Again and again, until variety is something you hear about in rumors, not in your own kitchen. Imagine sitting down at the family table, or more likely, sitting on the floor near the fire. In the center, a pot of stew simmers, thick with beans, cabbage, onions, and leeks if they're in season. Potatoes haven't reached Europe yet, so root vegetables like turnips and parsnips take their place. The broth is thin, barely more than water flavored by the ingredients floating in it. Each bowl is ladled out carefully because portions matter. A ladle too generous today could mean hunger tomorrow, and if there's a scrap of salted pork floating in the pot, it feels like a feast. That single bite of meat, rich and savory, lingers on your tongue longer than anything else, because you know you won't taste it again soon. Even the drink that accompanies these meals is plain. All is common, but don't picture the golden paint poured at a modern bar. This ale is weak, low in alcohol, brewed by women in small batches, cloudy and sour compared to modern standards. But it's safer than water, which is often contaminated by waste or stagnant ponds. Children drink ale. Adults drink ale. Everyone does, because it's what keeps disease at bay. A jug of small beer might sit near the hearth, poured into rough wooden cups or clay mugs, passed from hand to hand. And let's not forget hunger itself, because for a medieval farmer, hunger is never fully gone. It's not a stranger that visits occasionally. It's a constant companion, a dull ache in the stomach that never quite disappears, no matter how much porridge or bread you eat. Meals aren't about satisfaction. They're about keeping that ache from roaring into pain. You eat just enough to silence it, never enough to forget it. Now imagine how that shapes your body. A modern person used to protein-rich diets, fresh fruits, and an endless variety of foods would wither under this monotony. Your muscles are expected to carry plows, swing scythers, and haul water, but your diet doesn't match the demands. You're running a marathon every single day on food that would barely fuel a modern office worker. Weakness isn't a possibility, it's a guarantee. And yet, you keep going, because there's no other option. The food isn't just meager, it's seasonal. In spring, the stores from last year run dangerously low. Meals get thinner, smaller, stretched with whatever scraps are left. This time of year is called the hungry gap, when bellies tighten and children cry more often at night. By summer, fresh vegetables and fruits start to appear, but only for a short while. Autumn brings the harvest, the busiest and most crucial moment of the year, when the fields dictate whether you'll eat well or starve through the winter. And then winter itself comes, when salted meat, dried beans, and stored grain are the only defenses against months of cold. Every bite of food carries the weight of planning and prayer. Every crumb of bread is earned by sweat in the fields. Nothing is wasted, not even the scraps at the bottom of the pot. Families scrape bowls clean with pieces of bread, making sure not a drop of broth is lost. Bones are boiled again and again until every last bit of flavor is pulled from them. Waste is not a word in your vocabulary, because waste is death. And consider how meals are shared. In the cramped space of the hut, the pot of stew is communal, each family member dipping their spoon or ladle in turn. Children don't get their own plates, and adults don't claim private portions. Everyone eats together, and everyone knows that equality in meals is survival. If one person takes more, another goes hungry. Meals are not just food. They are lessons in fairness, restraint, and the hard truth that hunger doesn't care about your pride. For us today, food is wrapped in choice. We can open a fridge and decide between fruit or yogurt, cereal or toast, coffee or tea. For a medieval farmer, there is no decision. What's in the pot is what you eat. What's in the field is what you eat. What's left in storage is what you eat. And sometimes what's not there means you don't eat at all. Think for a moment, could you handle that? Could you sit down to the same porridge day after day without variety, without seasoning, without a single treat to look forward to? Could you endure the slow grind of hunger that never truly fades, even after a meal? For a modern stomach, the answer is probably no. For a medieval farmer, it's simply life. So when we ask why you wouldn't last a day in their shoes, this is one of the first reasons. Not just the hard labor, not just the smoky hut, but the food, or rather, the lack of it. Imagine pushing a plow through heavy soil, swinging a scythe under the hot sun, hauling buckets of water from a well, all while fueled by nothing more than a crust of bread and a bowl of thin gruel. Imagine lying down at night with your stomach half empty, knowing tomorrow will be the same. This was their diet. This was their reality. And it's one that shaped their bodies, their minds, and their endurance in ways we can barely comprehend. But remember, food is only fuel. And in the medieval world, fuel was only as useful as the work it powered. Once the porridge bowl is scraped clean and the bread is gone, there's no more waiting. It's time to rise, to take up your tools, and to step into the fields for the relentless grind of labor that defines every waking hour. The porridge is gone. The bread is gone. Your stomach is neither full nor empty, just suspended in that dull ache that you've come to accept as normal. You set your wooden bowl aside, wipe your hands on your coarse wool tunic, and step outside. The air is fresher than inside the hut, but it carries no promise of rest. Outside, the fields stretch endlessly, and with them comes the reality that defines your life work. And here's the truth. When we talk about the life of a medieval farmer, we have to talk about the grind. Not a 9-to-5 job with weekends off. Not even a back-to-back double shift you dread. No, this is something entirely different. This is labor that begins with the rising sun and ends only when darkness forces you to stop. It is a cycle so relentless that the very idea of a day off would be laughable. There are no Saturdays to look forward to, no lazy Sundays with coffee and a paper. There is no concept of my time, no holidays booked months in advance. Your weekend is the same as your weekday. Work doesn't respect the calendar hanging in your kitchen because you don't have a calendar. The only calendar that matters is the sky above you and the soil beneath your feet. The sun rises early in the summer, sometimes before 3 in the morning. That's when you start. There's no snooze button, no bargaining for just a little more sleep. The rooster crows, the sky begins to lighten, and you're already late. By the time the heat of noon is beating down, your shirt is soaked through, your back aches from bending, and your hands are blistered from gripping tools that were designed to be effective, not comfortable. But still, you keep going because stopping is not an option. Your labor is dictated by the agrarian calendar, a cycle of tasks that never lets up. It changes with the seasons, yes, but it never slows. Spring brings planting, summer brings weeding and harvesting, autumn brings sowing for winter, and winter itself brings repairs, wood cutting, and preparation for the next cycle. The grind doesn't pause. It only shifts its shape. Now let's pause for a second. Imagine your own body in this situation. Maybe you're fit. Maybe you work out, go for runs, or lift weights. But the grind of the medieval farmer is something else entirely. It's not 1 hour of exercise followed by a protein shake. It's not a jog in the park followed by a hot shower. It's 12 to 16 hours of non-stop physical exertion with no modern comforts to ease the toll. No padded shoes, no ergonomic tools, no breaks to hydrate with sports drinks. Just you, your body, and the earth that demands everything you have to give. You push a plow through heavy, clay-filled soil. The plow is wooden, iron-tipped and heavy. It groans under the strain, pulled by oxen that need as much guidance as they do strength. The reins cut into your hands, the mud sucks at your boots, and the sun climbs higher overhead. Your shoulders burn, your legs tremble. But the field doesn't care. It demands row after row, and the work won't finish itself. When it's not ploughing, it's weeding. Hours bent double, pulling stubborn plants from the earth with your bare hands or a crude tool, feeling the strain ripple through your spine until standing straight again feels almost impossible. Or maybe it's reaping grain with a sickle, a motion so repetitive, so back-breaking, that even strong men collapse into bed at night with wrists throbbing and shoulders screaming. And remember, there is no escape. If you are sick, you still work. If you are injured, you still work. A sprained ankle, a fever, a cut that festers. None of these excuses the grind. To stop is to fall behind. And in this world, falling behind doesn't just mean shame. It means hunger. It means your family doesn't eat. The grind is not just work. It is survival. This constant labor carves itself into the body of the medieval farmer. Calluses so thick they almost look like armor cover the hands. The skin darkens from years in the sun, leathered and rough. Muscles build not in sculpted gym shapes, but in wiry, functional strength, born of necessity. But the toil is brutal. Joints wear down early. Backs curve from endless bending. By the time a farmer reaches his 40s, if he makes it that far, his body is already breaking down from decades of relentless punishment. And the mental toll is just as heavy. Imagine waking up every morning knowing that today will be exactly like yesterday. No new challenges, no change of pace, just the same endless sequence of tasks, repeated until your body gives out. The grind wears down not only the body but also the spirit. Modern people talk about burnout from emails and deadlines. Imagine burnout from a lifetime of ploughing, reaping, and hauling with no hope of escape. And yet, here's the incredible thing, this grind was normal. No one questioned it. No one asked, "When's my vacation?" Or, "What's my work-life balance?" The very idea of choosing not to work would be absurd. Work was life. Life was work. The two were inseparable, and that mindset, hammered into every farmer from childhood, is what kept the system turning. But even within the grind, there's a rhythm. The year itself dictates the pace, and each season has its own particular demands. Winter doesn't bring rest, only different work. Spring doesn't bring freedom, only more urgency. The grind is relentless, yes, but it is also organized by the natural cycles that rule the medieval world. So when we say relentless, we mean it. This is not a metaphor. This is not exaggeration. It is the lived reality of millions of people who spent every waking hour fighting against hunger, against time, against the earth itself. It is the reason most of us today wouldn't last a single day in their place, because while we crave comfort, they endured discomfort as their baseline. Where we expect rest, they expected only more work. Now, step back and look at the year ahead, not just the day. The grind doesn't end when the sun goes down. It doesn't end at the change of a season. It continues, reshaping itself with demands of winter, spring, summer, and fall. To really understand the life of a medieval farmer, we need to look not just at the endless work of a single day, but at the endless work of the entire year. So let's move forward and walk through the farmer's year, season by season, to see just how inescapable the grind truly was. The relentless grind doesn't just belong to a single day. It stretches across the whole year, woven into a cycle so demanding that the changing of seasons brings no relief, only new kinds of work. For a medieval farmer, life is not about, "What will I do today?" It is about, "What must be done now, in this season, to survive the next?" And if you miss your moment, if you fall behind in this unforgiving rhythm, the penalty isn't a bad performance review or a lean month of pay. The penalty is hunger. The penalty is death. Let's begin with the hardest place to start: winter. You might think winter offers some kind of rest. The fields lie fallow, the ground is too hard to plough. Snow, cold, and short days seem like excuses to stay inside by the fire. But the reality is far from restful. Winter is its own battlefield. The days are short, but the tasks are long. Inside the hut, smoke drifts thick as families huddle together, but idleness is not allowed. Tools must be repaired, sharpened, or remade entirely. Wooden handles crack under strain, iron blades dull with use, ropes fray, baskets split. Every tool is a lifeline, and every one must be ready when spring calls. Winter is when you patch and prepare, your hands shaping wood and weaving fibers long into the dark hours. If you fail to do it now, you'll be unarmed when the real fight begins. Clothing, too, must be prepared. Wool spun from the autumn's shearing is carded and woven into coarse cloth. Women sit by the fire, spinning thread, weaving, and stitching, turning raw fleece into garments that might protect against the next year's cold. Every scrap of fabric matters. Every stitch holds weight. Because clothes don't just wear out here, they disintegrate under the strain of constant labor. Beyond the hut, winter demands woodcutting. Fires must burn every day, and the fuel does not gather itself. Men trudge into frozen woods, axes swinging, their breath misting in the frigid air. The sound of chopping echoes through the trees, each log hauled home on aching shoulders or creaking carts. Without wood, there is no warmth, no cooking, no survival. And the irony of winter is cruel. The season when you most need fire is also the hardest season to gather it. Then, there is the matter of food. Winter is when the truth of your harvest is revealed. Did you gather enough grain, beans, and salted meat? Did you smoke enough fish, store enough root vegetables, salt down enough pork? If you miscalculated, you'll know by February, when the barrels grow empty and the stomachs grow restless. This is the time of rationing, when portions shrink, when children's bellies ache louder, when a family debates which animal to slaughter early to stretch survival just a little longer. Hunger in winter has a name, the hungry gap. It falls in those bleak weeks of late winter and early spring, when last year's supplies are running low. But the new harvest is still months away. The fields are barren, the animals are lean, and every bite is counted. People stretch out meals with thin broths, scraps of dried peas, or bread made with more husk than flour. You wake hungry, you work hungry, you sleep hungry. But winter cannot last forever, and as the frost begins to retreat, a different kind of pressure arrives. Spring. Spring is not gentle. It is frantic, urgent, a mad rush to catch the moment before it slips away. When March arrives, the work explodes. The fields must be ploughed, and ploughed quickly. Oxen strain against the heavy moldboard plough, their breath steaming in the cool air, while you guide the blade through thick soil that's been resting all winter. The clods are heavy, resistant, fighting your every step, but this work cannot wait. Every day you delay is a day stolen from your harvest months later. Seeds must be sown with precision. Barley, oats, rye, wheat, each crop must find its place in the soil, scattered by hand, then covered and guarded. Birds watch from hedgerows, waiting to snatch the seed as soon as it hits the earth. So while one person sows, others scare the birds away, shouting, waving, throwing clods of earth. It is a dance of desperation, man versus time, man versus bird, man versus the clock that never stops. And spring brings not only crops, but livestock. Lambs and calves are born in this season, their bleats echoing across the fields. Each new life is precious, fragile, a promise of wool, milk, and meat. But each is also a risk. A lamb born too weak, a cow calving too early, and a family might lose months of future survival. So farmers watch their animals closely, sleeping lightly, ready to rise in the middle of the night to assist a struggling ewe or nurse a sick calf. The joy of birth is shadowed by the constant fear of loss. Spring is also the season of pruning and weeding. Fruit trees must be trimmed to ensure they bear well in the coming months. Weeds burst eagerly from the thawed soil, and if you don't catch them now, they'll choke your crops before summer arrives. You stoop low, hands deep in mud, tugging at stubborn roots until your fingers ache. The mud clings to your legs, the rain soaks your tunic, and the wind cuts through your damp clothes. But none of it stops the work, because weeds don't care about your comfort, and neither does survival. This is the season of urgency, of frantic energy, of doing everything all at once. Repair the fences to keep livestock from wandering. Mend the thatch before the spring rains collapse it. Spread manure across the fields to fertilize the soil. Tend to the lambs. Watch the calves scare the birds. Sow the seed, weed the garden, prune the trees. The list never ends, and the days, though longer now, never seem long enough. The body groans under the demands, but the mind is just as strained. Every choice feels like a gamble, every decision a risk. Sow too early, and frost may kill your seedlings. Sow too late, and the harvest will be poor. Neglect the animals, and they sicken. Neglect the fields, and they fail. You are constantly balancing on a knife's edge, with no safety net to catch you if you fall. And yet, within the frenzy of spring, there is a strange hope. The land is greening again, the sun returning, the days stretching longer. You feel life stirring all around you. The air smells of soil and rain, of growth and promise. Every lamb born, every seed sown, every tree pruned feels like a bet placed on the future. You can almost taste the harvest to come, though it is still months away. But don't mistake that hope for rest. Because hope doesn't feed you, work does. And if you falter in spring, the punishment will arrive months later, when the harvest comes up short and the hungry gap returns to claim its due. The farmer's year is not a gentle circle. It is a wheel that grinds endlessly forward, crushing those who stumble beneath it. So when you think of winter and spring for a medieval farmer, don't imagine rest and renewal. Imagine repairs and preparation, hunger and desperation, frantic sowing and constant fear. Imagine a year that begins not with celebration, but with survival, and rolls into spring like a drumbeat you cannot ignore. And as the wheel of the year turns again, we move into summer and fall, the most punishing seasons of all. Because if winter is the season of hunger, and spring the season of frenzy, then summer and fall are the season of absolute exhaustion. By the time spring gives way to summer, the rhythm of the farmer's year shifts once again. The urgency of planting is behind you, but there's no pause, no sigh of relief. Instead, summer demands something even greater, the strength to endure the busiest, most exhausting stretch of the year. This is the season of sweat, blistered hands, and aching backs. The time when every ounce of labor is poured into protecting, gathering, and storing what the earth has offered. Because in summer, the work you do doesn't just feed today. It decides whether you live through the winter to come. The days are brutally long. The sun rises early, flooding the sky with light by 3 or 4 in the morning, and it doesn't set until late into the evening. That means 15, sometimes 16 hours of potential work, and you use every single one. The fields are buzzing with life. Crops pushing skyward, weeds tangling through rows, birds and insects hungry for their share. To a farmer, summer is war. You fight against time, against pests, against the weather itself. And there is no guarantee you'll win. One of the most important tasks is haymaking. Grass must be cut with scythers, long sweeping motions, repeated hour after hour, until your shoulders burn and your hands tremble. Men and women move together across the meadow, their blades slicing in rhythm. The sound of steel against stalks a chorus of survival. The cut grass is left to dry in the sun, turned again and again with wooden rakes, until it is ready to be stacked into hayricks. This hay will feed your animals through the winter, and without it, your cows, sheep, and oxen will starve. Each swing of the scythe is not just labor. It is a promise of milk, wool, and plowing strength for the months when grass no longer grows. While hay is being made, crops in the fields are demanding attention. Early harvests must be gathered, weeds pulled before they choke out the precious grain, birds frightened away from the ripening heads of barley and wheat. Children are often pressed into service, their small hands better at scaring birds with clappers, stones, or loud shouts. The sound of cawing, shouting, and flapping fills the fields from dawn to dusk. It is noisy, chaotic, relentless, but necessary. Every seed saved from a bird's beak is a mouth fed in winter. And then comes the great harvest itself. By late summer, The fields are golden, the grain heavy on its stalks. Harvest is the climax of the year, the moment when all the sweat and labor of spring finally shows its worth. But there is no time for celebration, not yet. Harvest is a frantic race against the weather. A single storm could flatten the crop, soaking it until it rots or sprouts in the ear, turning months of hope into ruin overnight. So every able body, men, women, children, takes to the fields. The sickle is the tool of choice. Small, curved, sharp, it is used to cut each stalk close to the ground, handful by handful. It is slow, back-breaking work. You stoop for hours, cutting, gathering, bundling, tying sheaves. The sun beats down. Your back feels like it might snap. Your hands blister and bleed. But you keep going because every hour matters. The work continues from dawn until dusk, and sometimes beyond, by the flicker of torchlight. Once cut, the grain must be bound into sheaves, then gathered into stacks to dry. And this is only the beginning. The real work comes later, when the grain must be threshed, beaten with flails to separate the kernels from the stalk, and then winnowed, tossing it into the air so the breeze carries away the chaff. Imagine standing in a barn or in the open air, swinging a flail over and over, hour after hour, until your shoulders scream with pain. The rhythm is steady, hypnotic, punishing. Dust fills your lungs, chaff clings to your sweaty skin. Your muscles ache, but you cannot stop. Because only clean, dry grain will keep through the winter. By the time autumn rolls in, you might think the pace would slow. But no. Autumn is the season of preparation, the time when you look ahead and secure the year to come. In September and October, the next round of crops must be sown. Winter wheat, rye and barley planted to sprout before the cold sets in. The plow is dragged once more across the fields, the oxen straining, the soil turned and seeded. This must be done quickly and precisely, because if the frost comes early, your seed will fail. And a failed planting means starvation not just for you, but for everyone who depends on your work. Meanwhile, the harvest itself demands processing. Grain must be ground into flour at the local mill, and that means hauling heavy sacks across rough paths, or paying the miller his fee. The miller's toll is resented but unavoidable. No peasant can live without bread, and no bread exists without grinding. The rhythm of grinding, kneading, and baking becomes the heartbeat of the village in autumn, smoke from hearths rising daily into the cooling sky. And then there are the animals. November is the time of slaughter. Animals that cannot be fed through the winter must be killed, their meat preserved through salting, smoking, or drying. It is a grim but necessary task, a season when barns echo with the sounds of bleating and squealing, when knives flash, when blood stains the straw. Nothing is wasted. Hides are tanned into leather, fat rendered into tallow, bones boiled for broth. Every part of the animal is used, because every part represents survival. The salted meat is stored in barrels, the smoked meat hung in rafters, each piece a promise of nourishment in the lean months ahead. As autumn deepens, flocks and herds are gathered and driven into shelters. Sheep are penned, cows are brought close to the village, pigs are fattened on the last fallen acorns in the woods before being butchered. It is a season of both abundance and urgency, the last chance to prepare before the icy grip of winter closes again. And through all this labour, the medieval farmer feels the same constant pressure. If you falter, even for a moment, the consequences are brutal. A poorly timed harvest, a failed planting, a weak haystack, a spoiled barrel of meat. Any of these could mean hunger, sickness, or death in the months ahead. Autumn is not a time of winding down. It is a time of reckoning, of tallying your survival against the demands of the year. By the time December arrives, the body is ragged, worn, exhausted from months of unbroken labour. And yet, there is no end in sight, because the cycle is about to begin again, with winter's hungry gap, with tools that need mending, with fields waiting to be ploughed. The farmer's year is an unbroken circle, an eternal grind that binds generation after generation. For us, the seasons bring holidays, vacations, leisure. For them, the seasons bring a relentless drumbeat of labour, each one carrying its own weight of demands and dangers. Summer and fall do not mean freedom. They mean exhaustion, desperation, and preparation for the hardest months of all. And still, this is only one part of the picture, because all of this labor, all of this sweat and pain depends on the simplest tools. Tools so basic, so heavy, and so unforgiving that most of us today wouldn't last 10 minutes using them. And yet, in the hands of the medieval farmer, these tools shaped nations, cleared forests, and built the world we live in. So let's step closer and look at the instruments of survival, the tools of the trade that defined the medieval farmer's endless struggle. The year's grind is brutal, but here's the truth: without tools, the farmer wouldn't even stand a chance. The medieval farmer didn't have machines to lighten the load. No tractors, no combines, no motorized plows humming across the fields. Everything that needed doing had to be done by hand or with the help of animals, guided by tools that were simple, unforgiving, and brutally heavy. To us, they might look primitive. To them, they were lifelines. Take the plow. At first glance, it seems unremarkable. A wooden frame with an iron-tipped blade drawn by a team of oxen. But for a medieval farmer, the plow is nothing short of revolutionary. Earlier versions, like the Roman scratch plow, could only scratch shallow furrows into light soils. They were useless against the thick, heavy clay of northern Europe. But the moldboard plow, the medieval innovation, changed everything. Its curved blade cut deep into the earth, turning heavy soil over and burying weeds in the process. That one invention unlocked vast tracts of land that had previously been impossible to farm, fueling a population boom that reshaped the continent. But let's not romanticize it. The plow was a beast. Heavy, awkward, demanding both strength and skill. It didn't glide easily across the soil. It groaned and shuddered as oxen strained against their yokes, hooves sinking deep into the mud. You, the farmer, walked behind, gripping rough wooden handles, guiding the blade's path with every ounce of your strength. The plow resisted you. The soil resisted you. Your shoulders ached, your arms shook, your boots filled with mud. Each row carved into the earth was a small victory, won through sweat and sheer stubbornness. And the oxen, your partners in survival, were no easy allies. They were powerful, yes, but slow, stubborn, and prone to exhaustion. A poorly trained team could veer off course, dragging the plow sideways, ruining the furrows you worked so hard to keep straight. Your whip cracked, your voice shouted commands, your body strained against the weight. It was teamwork, but it was also struggle. Every furrow dug was a battle, and the field was the battlefield. When it came time to harvest, the sickle was the tool of choice. Small, sharp, and curved like a crescent moon, it fit snug in your hand, designed to slice through stalks of grain with a quick, sweeping motion. But here's the thing: a sickle harvest is slow. You bend low, grip a handful of stalks and cut, handful after handful, hour after hour, day after day. Your back burns, your knees ache, your hand cramps around the handle until your knuckles go numb. A field of wheat might look golden and beautiful from afar, but up close it's a sea of labor that demands every scrap of your endurance. The scythe was another tool, larger than the sickle, with a long curved blade fixed to a wooden shaft. It allowed for wide, sweeping strokes, cutting down grass or grain in arcs that required both rhythm and strength. In skilled hands, a scythe could clear a field faster than sickles alone. But it was also dangerous, its long blade sharp enough to cut deep into flesh if you misjudged your swing. Farmers bore scars as proof of their long hours spent scything, their legs and arms nicked by mistakes made when exhaustion dulled their focus. And harvesting was only the beginning. Once the grain was cut, it had to be threshed. Enter the flail, a simple but punishing tool made of two wooden rods connected by a leather thong. You gripped the longer rod and swung the shorter one down onto the sheaves of grain, beating them until the kernels shook loose from their stalks. The sound of threshing echoed across villages in autumn, a dull, rhythmic thud, thud, thud as men, women, and children all joined in the task. Dust rose into the air, coating your skin, clogging your lungs. Your arms ached from the repetition, the weight of the flail slamming down again and again. It was monotonous, exhausting, endless. But without it, there was no bread. After threshing came winnowing. Grain and chaff had to be separated, and the method was as ancient as it was simple. You tossed the threshed grain into the air with a wide, flat basket, letting the wind carry the lighter chaff away while the heavier kernels fell back down. On windy days, the work went faster. On still days, it dragged, the chaff refusing to lift, the grain falling heavy in clumps. Either way, the process demanded patience, and patience was in short supply when the harvest clock was ticking. Beyond the big tools, countless smaller ones filled a farmer's life. Wooden rakes for turning hay, hoes for weeding, axes for splitting wood, spades for digging. Each was simple, each required skill, and each wore down the body in its own way. None of them were designed with comfort in mind. No handles shaped to fit the palm, no polished edges. They were rough, splintering heavy. They did their job, but they also carved colices into your hands and grooves into your bones. And tools weren't just physical objects. They were investments, often shared or borrowed. A plow might belong to several families, each taking turns with it. Iron was expensive, so a broken blade or lost tip wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a crisis. Blacksmiths were essential members of the community, mending blades, repairing hinges, and keeping the lifelines of farming intact. Without them, tools would splinter, rust, and fail. And when tools failed, farmers failed. Think about your own daily tools for a moment. Your phone, your laptop, your car. Imagine them breaking and having no easy way to replace them. No store down the road, no delivery service to bring a new one tomorrow. Imagine instead having to wait for the local smith to have time, skill, and material to repair it. Imagine knowing that until it was fixed, your work, and therefore your survival, was at risk. That was the reality of the medieval farmer's relationship with tools. And here's the deeper truth: these tools didn't just shape fields. They shaped society. The moldboard plow and the three-field system allowed Europe's population to explode, clearing forests, expanding villages, and fueling trade. Tools were the difference between empty bellies and thriving communities, between survival and collapse. They were crude, they were heavy, they were punishing, but they were everything. So, when you picture yourself in the life of a medieval farmer, don't just imagine the hut, the food, or the grind. Imagine gripping a plow until your arms shake. Imagine bending with a sickle until your spine feels like it might snap. Imagine swinging a flail until your shoulders can't lift anymore. And then imagine doing it again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, for the rest of your life. This was the farmer's toolkit. Not glamorous, not advanced, but brutally effective. Tools that demanded sweat, blood, and endurance, and gave nothing in return but survival. And yet, tools alone didn't define the farmer's life. Because even with all the sweat, all the ploughing, all the harvesting, the medieval farmer was never truly free. There was another weight pressing down, heavier than any plough, sharper than any sickle, the weight of the system itself, the feudal cage. You've survived the hut, the hunger, the endless grind, and the weight of those crude, punishing tools. But here's the thing. Even if you mastered all of that, even if your body held out and your hands never stopped working, you'd still never be free. Because in the medieval world, the greatest burden wasn't the mud, the smoke, or even the back-breaking labor. The greatest burden was the cage you were born into. A cage made not of iron bars, but of land, law, and power. This was feudalism. Now, let's clear something up. When we think of slavery, we imagine chains, whips, people being bought and sold. And while the life of a medieval serf wasn't exactly slavery, it wasn't freedom either. It lived in that grey, suffocating space between. A serf was bound, not by shackles but by obligation, not by prison walls but by land that could never truly be theirs. Imagine this: you're born into a hut on a plot of land. From the very first breath you take, that land claims you. It is not yours. It belongs to the Lord. Your family cannot leave it. You cannot pack up and move to the next village without permission. You cannot decide. I'll try something else. Maybe I'll be a merchant, maybe I'll join a craft guild. No. The land owns you because the Lord owns the land. And the Lord owns the right to every hour of your labor. Marriage, not your decision. If you wish to wed someone from outside your manor, you must pay a fine or secure the Lord's approval. Sometimes he refuses, simply because he can. Children. They too are born into the same bond. Your son will grow up to work the same fields, pay the same dues. Your daughter, even if she marries, cannot carry you out of this system. Freedom isn't passed down in families here. Bondage is. This arrangement might sound unbearably cruel, and in many ways it was. But it also came from necessity. After the collapse of the Roman Empire, Europe was fractured, dangerous, unstable. Roads weren't safe. Bandits prowled the countryside. Raiders swept down from the north. There was no centralized government strong enough to keep order. So, people turned to whoever could offer protection. The lords. In exchange for that protection, peasants gave their labor, their loyalty, and their freedom of movement. That was the contract. The lord protects, the serf works. On the surface, it sounds like a trade. But in reality, the scales were tipped. The lord lived in a fortified manor or a stone castle, feasting on meat and wine, while the serf bent his back in the fields, scraping by on porridge and ale. The lord hunted in forests, while the serf risked punishment if he so much as snared a rabbit without permission. The lord could summon knights, wield armies, command men to war. The serf could summon nothing but his own wary family, and here's where the cage tightens. Because the rules weren't just about land or labor, they crept into every corner of life. If you wanted to grind your grain, you often had to use the Lord's mill and pay a fee. If you wanted to bake bread, you might have to use the Lord's oven and pay again. If you wanted to press your grapes into wine or your olives into oil, the Lord's press was the only option. And yes, there was a fee. The very basics of survival were taxed, regulated, and controlled. This wasn't just economics. It was a system of power, a way of reminding you, day after day, that you were not free, that your life, your body, your labor all belonged, ultimately, to someone else. Even justice was not yours. If there was a dispute, you didn't go to a neutral court. You went to the Lord's court. He was judge, jury, and sometimes executioner. And in those courts, a peasant's word weighed little against a knight's or a noble's. But don't think for a second that rebellion was an option. The Lord had men at arms, knights in chainmail, swords and horses at his disposal. You had a hoe, a sickle, and maybe a pitchfork. Violence against the system was suicide, so you endured. Not because you wanted to, but because you had no other choice. And yet, here's the bitter twist. This system, as crushing as it was, also gave you something: safety. As brutal as it sounds, many peasants accepted the feudal cage because the alternative was worse. Beyond the manor's reach, the world was chaos. Raiders could burn your village. Bandits could slaughter your family. A wandering warlord could claim your fields overnight. But under the Lord, at least there was structure. At least there was protection. You might live in bondage, but you lived. Still, imagine yourself in this position. Every sunrise, you drag yourself to the fields, not only for your family's survival, but for the wealth of your Lord. A portion of your crop, your livestock, your time, gone, taken as rent or tax. Every marriage contract, every birth, every funeral is touched by the Lord's hand. You live, you work, you die within the manor's shadow, and the cage never truly opens. For the modern mind, used to ideas of freedom, rights, and mobility, it's almost impossible to comprehend. We complain when we feel stuck in a job. We talk about wanting to escape the grind. But for a medieval serf, the grind wasn't just work. It was law. It was obligation. It was the very structure of existence. The feudal cage wrapped around you at birth and stayed until death, no matter how strong your will or how loud your protests. So when you ask yourself if you could last a day as a medieval farmer, remember, it wasn't just about surviving the work or enduring the hunger or tolerating the smoke-filled hut. It was about living inside a cage you could never escape. A cage where your sweat enriched another, where your choices were never truly yours, where freedom was not even an idea worth dreaming of. And yet, there was still a price to pay beyond labor, beyond bondage. A price measured not just in time or crops, but in constant dues, taxes, and forced obligations that left you poorer, weaker, and closer to ruin with every passing year. Protection was never free, and the cost of survival in this cage was higher than most modern minds can even imagine. By now, you've seen how the medieval farmer was trapped in the feudal cage. But there's something we need to make absolutely clear: the cage wasn't free. Protection under a lord came at a cost, and not just any cost. A cost so steep, so crushing, that it drained away every drop of freedom, wealth, and energy a peasant might cling to. The price of survival wasn't measured in gold coins, because most peasants never touched a coin in their lives. It was measured in crops, livestock, labor, and the very rhythm of your days. Let's start with the tithe. 10% of everything you produced went straight to the church. 10% might not sound catastrophic in today's world, where we think in percentages, salaries, and taxes deducted invisibly from paychecks. But imagine this: your harvest barely feeds your family through the winter. You've counted every grain, rationed every crust, worried through every hungry night. Then, at the end of it, a man from the church comes knocking, and he doesn't ask if you can spare it. He demands 10% of your grain, 10% of your animals, 10% of the very lifeblood you worked yourself raw to produce. So large were these collections that special barns, tither barns, had to be built just to hold the church's share. Imagine standing inside one, its great timbered roof stretching overhead, filled from wall to wall with the fruits of peasant labor. Each stack of hay, each pile of grain sacks, each bleating animal represented hunger, denied to one family and plenty secured for another. And the tithe was just the beginning. Beyond the church's demand, your lord had his own claims. You owed him a share of your crops. Maybe you handed over sheaves of wheat, or barrels of barley, or bundles of wool. Maybe you delivered chickens, eggs, or even a pig when he called for it. These payments weren't optional. They weren't negotiable. They were the rent on your existence, and you paid them whether you could afford to or not. Then there were the fines. Feudal life was riddled with fees for everything, and the Lord's court was always ready to collect. Want your son to join the church? Pay a fee to compensate the Lord for losing a worker. Want your daughter to marry outside the manor? Pay a fee, because that means her labor leaves the estate. Want to inherit your father's plot after he dies? Pay a fee for the privilege of continuing the life you were already born into. Even death didn't release you. Your heirs had to pay a relief, essentially a death tax, just to hold on to the land their family had worked for generations. And hovering over all of this was the corvée, the demand for unpaid labor. At certain times of the year, the Lord could summon you to work his land, not your own. You left your fields, your animals, your family, and trudged to the demesne, the Lord's personal holdings. There you might plough his fields, repair his roads, harvest his crops, or cut his timber. And you did it for nothing. Not a coin, not a crumb, not a kind word in return. Just obligation, just the unspoken truth that if you refused, your family would pay in ways you couldn't risk imagining. For some, this obligation was a few days each year. For others, it stretched into weeks. In the harshest cases, it was nearly half your life. 5 days out of every week surrendered to your Lord, leaving only scraps of time for your own land. Imagine the fury of watching your children hungry, your fields weedy, your animals neglected. All because your hands were busy fattening another man's storehouses. And yet you had no choice. The corvée was law. Think about that for a moment. In our modern world, when we complain about taxes or long hours, we do so with the knowledge that at least some of the fruits of our labor are ours. The medieval farmer couldn't even claim that. Every sunrise brought the question, how much of today's sweat belongs to me? and how much belongs to someone else? The answer was almost always very little for you, almost everything for them. And still it didn't end there. Beyond the tithers, the rents, the fines, and the corvée, there were constant customs and dues. Maybe you had to provide hens at Easter. Maybe you owed a cartload of wood at Christmas. Maybe you had to host the Lord's men when they travelled, feeding them from your already empty pot. Even the smallest aspects of your life were touched by obligation, each one another thread tightening the cage around you. To modern eyes it seems unbearable, and in truth it was. The weight of these demands bent peasants low, pressed them into poverty that felt inescapable. But here's the remarkable thing: the system endured for centuries. Why? Because it worked not for the peasants, but for those at the top. The church grew rich on tithers. The lords grew powerful on rents and labour, and the peasants, bent-backed and weary, endured because there was no alternative. Imagine standing at the edge of your field at dusk, sweat stinging your eyes, hunger gnawing at your belly, watching the grain you've cut loaded into carts for the tithe barn or the Lord's storehouse. Your children are thin, your clothes patched and ragged, your hands cracked and bleeding. And yet, you know tomorrow you will rise and do it again. Because to stop is to starve, to resist is to die. This was the price of survival, paid not once, not twice, but every day, in every season, across an entire lifetime. Paid in sweat, in hunger, in the slow erosion of freedom and dignity. Paid by millions who lived and died without ever seeing a world beyond their village, their fields, their cage. And here's the question for you: could you bear it? Could you rise each day knowing that no matter how hard you worked, no matter how much you produced, the best of it would be taken from you? Could you keep pushing, keep sweating, keep breaking your body, all for the scraps left behind? Most of us wouldn't. Most of us couldn't. But for the medieval farmer, this was not a matter of choice. It was life. It was the unshakable truth that survival had a price, and it was always higher than you could afford. And yet, even under this crushing system, one thing kept the farm running, one thing kept families alive. It wasn't just the serf alone, it was the family. Men, women, children. All hands working, all lives contributing, each person's labour as vital as the next. Without the family unit, no peasant could survive the endless demands of the fields and the lords. The price of survival wasn't something a medieval farmer could shoulder alone. No matter how strong his arms, no matter how many hours he gave the fields, one man's work wasn't enough to keep a family fed, a hut standing, and obligations to both church and lord met. Survival was a collective act, and that meant every member of the household, man, woman, and child, carried a share of the load. To understand the life of a farmer, you have to understand this: a family was not just a family. It was a workforce, a survival machine, a web of tasks that bound every person into the same endless grind. Let's start with women. Forget the modern stereotype of medieval women as passive, locked away in domestic duties while men did the real work. In truth, peasant women were the backbone of the farm. Their labour stretched far beyond the hearth and into every corner of survival. At dawn, while the men prepared to head into the fields, women were already at the fire, rekindling the embers, boiling porridge, feeding children. But once the bowls were scraped clean, many of those same women stepped into the fields alongside the men. They reaped with sickles, gleaned fallen stalks of grain, weeded between rows, gathered hay, and carried heavy bundles on their backs. They knew the land just as well as their husbands, their brothers, their fathers. The image of men labouring while women stayed idle simply wasn't reality. Without women's hands in the fields, the harvest would never have been brought in. But their work didn't stop when they left the soil. The hut itself was a centre of production. Women spun wool into thread, wove that thread into rough cloth, and stitched garments that would clothe the family through rain and frost. They brewed all, not as a hobby, but as a necessity. Small beer for children, stronger ale for adults, all safer than water. In fact, Brewing became such a common and vital task that women dominated it as an industry in medieval England, earning the title of all-wives. Ale wasn't just drink, it was nutrition, calories in liquid form, and its production fell squarely on women's shoulders. The kitchen garden was also their domain. Small plots carved near the hut grew onions, leeks, beans, peas, cabbages, and herbs. Women tended these gardens carefully, because what sprouted there often made the difference between bland porridge and a stew with actual flavor and nutrients. They knew when to plant, when to harvest, when to dry herbs for winter storage. Every handful of vegetables mattered. Then there was the hearth. Cooking wasn't as simple as throwing ingredients into a pot. Firewood had to be gathered, kindling coaxed to flame, pots watched and stirred over smoky fires. Bread was baked in communal ovens, but dough had to be mixed and kneaded at home, the flour stretched with anything available, bran, peas, even acorns in desperate times. Laundry meant hauling clothes to a stream, scrubbing them with lye or ashes until your knuckles bled. Caring for the sick meant brewing herbal remedies, washing wounds, sitting awake at night while fevers raged. All of this was done while raising children. Yet here again, children weren't shielded from the grind. Childhood, as we imagine it, a time of play, innocence, and learning, simply didn't exist. From the moment they could walk and carry, children worked. A 5-year-old might scare birds from the fields, clapping sticks together or throwing stones. An 8-year-old might gather firewood, fetch water, or watch younger siblings. By 10 or 12, children worked full days alongside their parents, reaping, weeding, gleaning, or tending animals. It wasn't cruelty. It was necessity. A child's labor wasn't extra. It was essential. Without it, a family could fall behind, and falling behind meant hunger. Even play often revolved around work, with children mimicking adult tasks, learning through imitation, their games indistinguishable from practice for the future. And when children grew older, many were sent away. Boys and girls alike often left home to serve in wealthier households, working as servants, shepherds, or apprentices. This wasn't abandonment. It was part of the cycle. Their wages, however small, were sent home, a lifeline for struggling families. And in turn, they learned skills, spinning, weaving, plowing, cooking, that would sustain them when they married and started households of their own. Childhood was short. Responsibility arrived early. Even the elderly were not idle. An older parent might no longer have the strength for ploughing or harvesting, but they could tend children, mend clothes, shell peas, or weave baskets. Their knowledge was invaluable, passed down through stories and instruction. Age didn't mean retirement. It meant shifting into roles that still kept the family machine running. The family's worth was measured in its ability to endure together. Alone, no one survived. Together, they stood a chance. Each person's labor intertwined with the others. Men driving oxen, women brewing ale, children chasing birds, grandparents tending the fire. It wasn't equality in the modern sense, but it was interdependence. Everyone carried a piece of the burden, and no one's work was optional. Now pause for a moment and imagine yourself in this system. Could you, raised in a world where childhood means school and play, ask your 8-year-old to work the fields all day? Could you, used to convenience, ask your spouse to wake before dawn, cook over open flames, then labor in the dirt until dusk, all while raising children and managing a household? Could you ask your parents, long past their prime, to keep working, to keep producing, until their last breath? For the medieval farmer, these weren't questions. They were facts of life. Family wasn't about love alone. It was about survival. The family was the engine that powered the farm, and without every cog turning, the machine broke down. And yet, even with the family working as one, survival was never guaranteed, because beyond hunger, beyond the feudal cage, beyond the unending labor, there were threats that could sweep everything away in an instant. Threats that didn't care how hard you worked or how tightly your family held together. You've seen how the medieval farmer's life depended on the hut, the food, the grind, the tools, and the family. But even if all of those things worked in perfect harmony, even if your fields grew well and your children worked tirelessly by your side, survival was never secure. Because looming over every season, every year, every breath were threats. Endless threats. Some you could see and fight, others you couldn't even comprehend until they struck. And the truth is, these threats were relentless. They stalked you from birth until death, and for many, they decided that death would come sooner rather than later. Let's start with disease. Today, we live in a world shaped by vaccines, antibiotics, hospitals, and doctors. A fever or an infection is frightening, yes, but rarely fatal if you can reach care. For a medieval farmer, a simple cough could spiral into death. A cut on the hand from a sickle could fester, swell, and kill in days. Dysentery swept through villages with filthy water. Typhoid stalked families crammed into smoky huts. Malaria lingered in marshy lands. Smallpox scarred and killed without mercy. And then there were the epidemics. The Black Death of the 14th century would later sweep across Europe, wiping out nearly half the population. Imagine entire villages silenced, huts abandoned, fields left unplowed. Imagine burying your children one day, your spouse the next, then waking up alone in a silent house. Even before the Black Death, smaller waves of plague and pestilence rolled through the centuries, each one a reminder that survival was never guaranteed. But disease was only one enemy. Hunger was another. We've already talked about the hungry gap, those months of scraping through dwindling supplies before the next harvest. But hunger was more than a background hum. It was a weapon, a storm that swept through whole regions when the harvest failed. And harvests failed often. A summer of rain could rot the grain before it ripened. A sudden frost could kill seedlings. A swarm of locusts could strip fields bare in hours. When crops failed, famine followed. One of the worst examples was the Great Famine of 1317. Torrential rains ruined crops year after year. Grain rotted, hay spoiled, animals starved. People ate whatever they could find. Dogs, cats, even bark and grass. Chroniclers whispered of darker things, desperate people turning on the dead, even on each other. The famine killed millions, not in a single burst, but in a slow, grinding misery that dragged on for years. And for every medieval farmer, famine was a spectre that haunted their thoughts every time a cloud passed over the sun. And if famine and disease weren't enough, war always lurked nearby. Remember, medieval Europe wasn't peaceful countryside dotted with happy villages. It was a patchwork of lords, kings, and rivals constantly at odds. When armies marched, they marched through farmland. And an army didn't just fight soldiers, it devoured villages. Soldiers looted huts, burned fields, slaughtered animals, and carried off anything of value. For the farmer, war didn't mean glory or honor. It meant watching your year's work trampled under horses' hooves, your grain carted off by strangers, your hut left in ashes. Bandits and raiders added another layer of fear. In borderlands or coastal villages, Viking raids had once terrorized communities, their longships appearing without warning. Later, mercenaries roamed the land during times of unrest, pillaging as they pleased. Even in quieter times, bands of thieves lurked along roads and in forests. A farmer's world was fragile, and a single raid could undo everything a family had worked for. And then there was the environment itself. Weather was unpredictable, sometimes cruel. Floods could wash away fields. Storms could collapse huts. Harsh winters could freeze livestock and people alike. Remember, this was before meteorology, before forecasts. The weather wasn't an inconvenience. It was a godlike force, feared, prayed to, cursed when it destroyed, praised when it blessed. A farmer lived under the sky's mercy, and the sky was merciless. The fragility of life shows itself most starkly in numbers. The average lifespan for a medieval peasant male in England hovered around just 31 years. Let that sink in. 31. Childhood was the most dangerous stretch. Many babies never saw their first birthday. Mothers died in childbirth, so often that entire families were reshaped in an instant. If you made it to adulthood, your odds improved. But even then, sickness, famine, or accident could cut your life short at any time. By your 40s, you were considered old. By your 50s, ancient. And the threats didn't just come from outside. They came from inside the very huts peasants called home. Crammed together with animals, breathing smoky air day after day, lungs grew weak, eyes dimmed, and infections spread quickly. Parasites thrived in straw bedding. Fleas and lice were constant companions, burrowing into clothing, biting at skin, spreading sickness. To us, this would feel unbearable. To them, it was simply life. Now imagine the weight of all of this pressing down at once. You've worked yourself to exhaustion in the fields, given crops to the church and the Lord, watched your family labor alongside you. And still, a single bad harvest could undo it all. A single fever could take your child. A single storm could flatten your roof. You could do everything right and still lose everything. That's the brutal truth of a medieval farmer's life. It wasn't just hard work, hunger, or lack of comfort. It was the endless shadow of threats you couldn't control. Today, if your job fails, there's unemployment aid. If you fall sick, there are hospitals. If a storm wrecks your home, there's insurance. For the medieval farmer, there were no safety nets. There was only the thin hope that tomorrow would be kinder than today, and the grim knowledge that often it wouldn't be. And yet, even in the face of these endless threats, people found ways to carry on. They clung to rituals, to the church, to festivals, to moments of light in the darkness. Because without those, the weight of existence would have been unbearable. By now, you've walked through the hut's smoke and darkness. You've tasted the porridge, bent beneath the grind, blistered your hands on the plow and sickle, and felt the weight of taxes, hunger, and endless threats. It's a grim picture, isn't it? And yet, for the medieval farmer, this was life. Not a punishment, not a nightmare to wake from, but the only world they knew. And here's the astonishing part within that world. They still found ways to live, to laugh, to celebrate, and to believe. Even in a cage, even in hardship, humans search for light. For the medieval farmer, that light often came from the church. The village church towered over the fields, its stone walls visible for miles. It wasn't just a place to pray. It was the heart of the community. Inside, the air was cool and dim, the flicker of candles casting shadows across painted walls. The priest's voice carried not only scripture but news, guidance, and the rhythm of holy days. For peasants, who owned almost nothing, the church offered something priceless meaning. Their struggles weren't random. Their hunger, their toil, their brief lives were part of a divine plan. That belief gave them strength to endure. The church also offered something rarer still, moments of rest. Feast days broke the monotony of the grind. Christmas, Easter, midsummer festivals. These weren't just holy days, they were lifelines. Work paused, fields rested. Families gathered to eat, drink, and celebrate. For 1 week at Christmas, the bleakness of winter lifted with music, feasting, and laughter. Easter brought processions, plays, and bonfires. On saints' days, villagers danced, drank ale, and joined in games. For people whose daily lives were dominated by labor and fear, these festivals were moments of joy, desperately needed and fiercely cherished. Markets were another kind of light. A few times a year, the village square or a nearby town would fill with stalls. Bright fabrics, strange spices, pottery tools, and livestock crowded the streets. For a farmer, it was a rare chance to trade surplus for goods they couldn't produce themselves. More than that, markets brought excitement, variety, the sense of being part of something larger than the narrow world of the manor. Gossip was exchanged, songs sung, deals struck. For a day, life felt bigger, fuller, alive with possibility. And even within the grind of everyday life, there were small comforts. A shared meal after a long day's harvest. A child's laughter chasing chickens in the yard. The warmth of animals huddled against the hut's walls on a freezing night. A story told by the fire, passed from parent to child. Simple moments that glowed in the darkness. Small reminders that life wasn't only toil. Superstition, too, played its part. Farmers prayed to saints, yes, but they also clung to older beliefs. Charms hung over doors to keep away evil, planting done by the phases of the moon, whispers of curses or blessings in the fields. These rituals them a sense of control, however fragile, over a world that often seemed merciless. If you buried a piece of bread in the furrows, maybe the harvest would be better. If you wore a certain charm, maybe your child would survive the fever. These beliefs weren't foolish to them. They were hope, and hope was survival. And this is what we must understand: medieval farmers didn't see themselves as miserable victims trapped in endless suffering. They laughed, they loved, they celebrated, even in the face of hardship. Their lives were short, yes, but full of meaning as they understood it. The church bell, the market song, the feast day fire, these were lights in the dark, sustaining them as much as bread and ale. But for us, looking back with modern eyes, the contrast is staggering. We live longer, eat better, rest more. We expect privacy, comfort, safety nets. We imagine freedom as a birthright. Place us in the shoes of a medieval farmer, even for a single day, and most of us would collapse beneath the weight. The smoke in the hut, the aching hunger, the endless labor, the cage of feudal law, the threats of famine and disease. These would crush us long before the sun set. That's why the verdict is so clear. The average modern person, raised in comfort, cushioned by technology, protected by medicine, would not last a single day in the life of a medieval farmer. It's not because we're weak in spirit. It's because our entire world has shaped us differently. The gap between their reality and ours is too vast, too unforgiving. And yet, there's something humbling in that realization. Because millions of people did last. They lived, worked, laughed, and died within that system, generation after generation. Their resilience built the foundation of the world we stand on today. Every road paved, every field cleared, every village raised was born from their sweat. We might not survive a day in their world, but they survived lifetimes. And that endurance, that quiet, unyielding strength, is nothing short of astonishing. So the next time you sip your morning coffee, press the snooze button, or scroll through your phone in the comfort of your warm, private room, remember them. Remember the farmer waking in the smoke-filled hut, sharing space with animals, pulling on worn boots to walk into the dawn. Remember the porridge, the plow, the taxes, the family, the threats. And remember that while you might not last a day in their world, they lasted centuries in theirs. And that is why, with confidence, we can say you wouldn't last a day as a medieval farmer. But thank goodness they did.